Before prophets walked and scriptures were written, before the word Islam echoed through mosques and hearts, there was only silence. And the stars. A silence filled with questions no one dared to answer. In the vastness of ancient Arabia, people carved their fears into stone, lit fires beneath sacred trees, and followed the moon like it was a god. Because to them, it was. This is not a story about blasphemy, it's a story about beginnings. About how the Kaaba once stood as a house for hundreds of gods, and how Allah was known, but not alone. About Hubal, the god of fate, standing where millions now kneel. About Al-Lat, Al-Uzza and Manat, goddesses once praised in poetry, now buried beneath centuries of silence. So why do we know so little of what came before? Who decides which truths survive? In this video, we're not here to convert or convince. We're here to remember, to look at pre-Islamic Arabia not as a dark age, but as a foundation. You'll uncover how Hajj and Ramadan may have bloomed from older soil, how stars once guided more than camels, and how what we call faith today may carry the fingerprints of gods long forgotten. And if any part of this shakes your understanding, let it. Not all storms destroy, some clear the sky for light to shine through. Arabia, the lost pantheon of gods. In the heart of the desert where rain rarely falls and silence often speaks louder than words, Arabia once breathed the names of many gods. This was a land without borders, but not without belief. Long before Islam unified it with one creed, Arabia was spiritually vast, home to wandering tribes who each carried their own divine names, their own rituals, their own altars in the sand. They worshipped under open skies, their prayers echoing in canyons and oases. From the blazing coasts of Yemen to the starlit sands of Hijaz, Arabia was not barren. It was sacred ground walked by many gods. The Kaaba, now central to Islam, was once a shrine that belonged to all and none. It housed 360 idols, each one a guardian of someone's story, someone's ancestry, someone's desperate prayer. To call this the age of ignorance, as some later would, is to misunderstand what it meant to survive in a land where every drop of water was a miracle. The gods were not distractions, they were responses. Responses to thunder that never came, to crops that never grew, to silence that never answered. Each deity represented an aspect of the earth, the sky, or the unseen. They were born of the landscape and carved by human longing. Hubal, the god of rain and fate, stood tall in Mecca. In every city, gods had names, faces, stories. And these stories stitched the tribes together far more than any sword ever did. What we see in this era is not chaos, but diversity. Faith was decentralized, yes, but it was also intimate. People prayed not just for salvation, but for trade, for rain, for healing. Every household had its deity. Every traveler carried an idol in his pouch, and still there was room for others. Arabia was a land that tolerated difference because it had to. Survival demanded cooperation. The Kaaba was not only a sanctuary, it was a peace treaty, a spiritual marketplace where gods coexisted, if only for the sake of keeping the roads safe. And that tells us something vital, that religion, at its root, is not just about divinity, it's about community. When people gather under different names, with mutual respect, they build a world that reflects both freedom and humility. That was Arabia before Islam, a world fragile yet vibrant, ancient yet ever-changing. And as we leave this chapter of many gods, we walk toward the sacred stones that house their memory. One stone stood above the rest, and one god began to rise. His name was Hubal. Hubal, Battles, and the magic of stones. Hubal was not simply a statue, he was a symbol of fate, of divine judgment, of ancestral reverence. His image, carved from red agate and placed inside the Kaaba, represented more than a god. It was a cosmic mediator. Merchants consulted him before sealing deals. Families sought his favor before marriages and burials. Warriors stood before him with trembling hands, casting arrows of divination to learn the will of the unseen. In a world without written law or institutional religion, Hubal was order, wisdom, power. The Quraysh offered him 100 camels before the Battle of Badr. They believed not just in him, but in his ability to change reality. But Hubal was not alone. Throughout Arabia, other deities lived not in statues but in stones, unshaped, uncarved, yet sacred. These stones were called beitils. To modern minds, they might seem primitive, but they were more profound than they appear. The stone was not a god itself, but a vessel, a home for the spirit, a reminder of the eternal. These beitils stood tall beside trees, wells, mountains. They were kissed before journeys, wept upon after loss. They were memory made solid, belief made visible. And even today, one stone remains kissed by millions. The black stone of the Kaaba. This worship of beitils wasn't limited to Arabs. In Canaan they were called Masaba. Among the Hebrews they were Matseva. In Nabatean temples they were the center of prayer. Even in Balinese Hinduism today, crude uncut stones are dressed in fabric and placed on thrones facing sacred mountains. Across time and culture, the idea is the same. The divine does not need form, only space. A rock, if chosen, can be a cathedral. The lesson here is quiet but powerful. Faith doesn't begin with scripture. It begins with attention, with recognizing that even inanimate things can carry meaning. That a stone, when blessed by intention, can remind us of what matters. Perhaps this is why, even after the rise of monotheism, the stones remained. The Kaaba was not destroyed, it was purified. The black stone was not discarded, it was embraced. That which holds memory is not easily abandoned. And as we leave the world of sacred stones, we now turn to those who ruled the heavens, the daughters of the Most High, once venerated, now erased. Yet their names still hum beneath the sand. The sacred female trinity, daughters of Allah. Long ago, when night skies still held the power to command fear and awe, 3 goddesses reigned across Arabia. They were not minor spirits or forgotten myths. They were central, essential, revered. Their names were Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. Together they formed a divine trinity, creatrix, protector, and arbiter of fate. Where men prayed to Hubal for judgment, women wept before Al-Lat for fertility, harvest, and strength. Pilgrims traveled to Taif to walk through her garden, lush with fruit trees and sacred silence. Her name simply meant the goddess. She was not a reflection of a male god. She was complete on her own. Al-Uzza, radiant and fierce, was associated with Venus, the morning star. Her shrine in Nakhla was marked by 3 sacred trees. Warriors prayed to her before battle. Mothers brought gifts when their children were sick. She was love and war entwined. Her energy moved like the planet she represented, appearing, disappearing, shining, retreating. It was said she could take the form of a roaring woman with wild hair and a blade of fire. Her dual nature was respected and feared. Manat was the oldest, the keeper of time and destiny. She did not comfort, she did not smile. She marked endings. Oaths made in her name could not be broken. Death walked near her. But so did truth. She lived between Mecca and Yathrib, and her followers came with their hair shaved and their sins laid bare. Her presence reminded them that every beginning has a price. That fate is not a punishment, but a path. These goddesses were not just symbolic, they had temples, rituals, poetry. Their names were carved in stone and memory, but when monotheism came, They were declared false. Their shrines were destroyed. Al-Uzza was beheaded by Khalid ibn al-Walid. Manat's temple was torn down. Al-Lat's sanctuary was razed after the people of Taif submitted. Yet their power endures, not in practice but in shadow. The feminine divine was never truly erased. It was absorbed. The mercy of Ar-Rahman, the nurturing of Al-Rahim, the names of Allah that speak of compassion, they carry echoes of the goddesses once adored. The Kaaba is still draped in silk. Rituals of purification still remain. And the stars still shine over Mecca, just as they did when Al-Uzza reigned. And so, in their rise and fall, we see the shape of transformation, not annihilation, but integration. That which is sacred is rarely lost. It only changes form. And as we walk forward, we carry their memory, not to worship, but to understand. To see that our beliefs are built not only on revelation, but on remembrance. And remembrance, when done with love, becomes a kind of healing, a light for those still searching. Hajj, Tawaf, and Ramadan, rituals older than Islam. Before Islam gave them sacred names and divine framing, the rituals of Hajj, Tawaf, and even Ramadan were already written into the heartbeat of Arabian life, etched in sand and starlight. These were not random customs, but reflections of human instinct, molded by the rhythm of the seasons, the scarcity of water, and the longing for divine favor. They were survival wrapped in symbolism, devotion born from dust. The Hajj was once a collective gathering of tribes, each bringing their own idols to the Kaaba. They didn't come merely to worship. They came to connect, to trade, to make peace. Pilgrimage was as political as it was spiritual. The Kaaba was a neutral ground, a house open to every god, every name. The act of tawaf, circling the Kaaba 7 times, was not unique to Islam. Ancient Arabs circled sacred stones, tents, trees, and even newborns, believing that movement around a center aligned them with the forces of the universe. 7 circles for 7 heavenly bodies. Their feet echoed the stars. Even the act of shaving one's head, of walking barefoot, of wearing simple garments during these rites all spoke to a deeper truth. When we shed our identities, we meet the divine naked and whole. The Ihram, now a symbol of equality before Allah, was once a way to strip away tribe, status, and pride, leaving only the human beneath. And what of Ramadan? Long before it marked the month of revelation, fasting existed in Arabia as a gesture of humility. Some tribes abstained from food and drink during periods of drought, believing that if they consumed less, the gods would bless them more. It was a spiritual negotiation, a humble offering in exchange for rain. In Yemen, the appearance of Sirius in the sky triggered sacred fasts. In Nakhla, tribes offered hair mixed with flour to the deities, believing the sacrifice would yield water and fertility. These rituals may now carry different intentions, but their roots remind us that faith begins not in doctrine, but in the cry of the human heart. The need for guidance, the need to be heard, and most importantly, the need to belong. What makes Hajj, Tawaf, and Ramadan so powerful is not only what they mean today, but how deeply they honor what came before. They whisper continuity. They show us that spiritual truth does not appear in a vacuum. It rises from the soil of ancient memory. And from these collective movements, we now enter the moment that changed the story forever. The day the idols fell, and with them an age of plural voices turned into one call, Allahu Akbar. The fall of the gods, how Muhammad reshaped Arabia. It began not with thunder, but with footsteps. The Prophet Muhammad returned to Mecca not as an orphaned boy, but as a messenger cloaked in prophecy and resolve. Behind him marched those who believed. Before him stood the symbols of everything he had been sent to transform. The Kaaba, still towering, still ancient, was wrapped in silence and surrounded by stone gods. Hubal, still raised, Al-Uzza, Manat, Al-Lat, still remembered, and then came the moment that shook centuries. Muhammad, holding a staff, pointed toward each idol and declared, "The truth has come, and falsehood has perished." The idols fell one after another, not by war, but by will, not by fire, but by word. This act was not just a cleansing of stone, it was a realignment of an entire worldview. For centuries, faith had been fragmented, tribal, and symbolic. Now it would be singular, universal, and personal. Allah was no longer a distant name among many. He was the name, not only the highest, but the only. And the Kaaba, once a house for all gods, became the house of one. Yet Muhammad didn't destroy everything. That is the miracle often missed. He kept the Kaaba, he preserved Tawaf, he honored Zamzam. He retained the motion, the places, the shapes, but filled them with a new meaning. He took what was familiar and reframed it. The same rituals now flowed with a clearer river. Even the black stone remained, and so we learn, reformation is not always demolition, sometimes it is reclamation. This was more than religious reform. It was socio-political genius. By uniting the tribes under one God, Muhammad united them under one purpose, one identity. Arabia, once scattered in belief and bloodline, was now bound by submission. Islam. Faith became not just vertical, but horizontal. It connected people not only to the divine, but to one another. This transformation reminds us that spiritual revolutions are not made only by destroying the old, but by redeeming it. The Kaaba did not change in shape, but in soul. And in that shift, the direction of the world was altered. Still, not all Kaabas stood in Mecca. There were others, less remembered, less spared. Let us now turn to those forgotten shrines and ask, what happens to sacred spaces when history moves on? The forgotten temples. Other Kaabas around Arabia. Mecca may have become the center of gravity, but it was never the only source of light. Scattered across ancient Arabia stood other Kaabas, each one a sanctuary of local devotion, each one reflecting the hopes of a people. There was the Kaaba of Najran, once honored by poets and pilgrims alike. The Kaaba of Gaiman, where a red stone gleamed like fire at dawn. The Kaaba of Sindad, more hall than altar, but sacred still, and most notably the Kaaba of Dul Khalasa, the white-stoned house of Yemen, the southern twin of Mecca. Dul Khalasa was beloved. There, tribes practiced divination, just as they did with Hubal. Sacred arrows were cast, sacrifices made, fortunes told. Pilgrims traveled far to touch its stones, to speak to its priests, to kneel in silence before the divine. It was known as Kaaba al-Yamaniya, the Kaaba of the South. But its holiness was a threat. When unity demanded singularity, the prophet is recorded as saying to Jarir al-Bajali, "Will you not relieve me of Dul Khalasa?" And so it was destroyed. Not with rage, but with mission. Its priests killed, its structure brought to dust. Its memory slowly erased. This was not cruelty, it was consolidation. In order for Mecca to become the axis of faith, the other centers had to fall. Just as Jerusalem had been claimed by the Israelites, just as Rome had centralized Christianity, Mecca had to stand alone. Yet even in this loss, there is a strange kind of beauty. The stories of these forgotten Kaabas remind us that sacredness is not bound to permanence. What was once divine does not vanish. It returns in new forms. It echoes in rituals, in language, in land. The white stone of Dul Khalasa may no longer be touched, but its light still flickers in the prayers of descendants who never knew its name. These lost temples whisper a truth. Faith is always evolving, and when one Kaaba rose above the rest, it did not invalidate the others. It absorbed them. It carried their shape, their symbolism, their structure. into a new era. And now, as the Kaaba remains the world's most visited religious monument, as Tawaf continues in endless rhythm, we must ask, how much of what we do today is new? And how much is remembrance disguised as revelation, because what follows is not the end of the old, but the beginning of something cosmic. The gods once walked the earth, but the next gods, they lived in the sky, and the stars, they say, never forget. The moon, the stars, and the gods above. Long before minarets reached for the sky reached into the hearts of men. The people of ancient Arabia didn't need books to know that something divine hovered above them. They simply looked up. The night sky was their scripture, and every star was a verse. The moon, Venus, Sirius, and constellations like Ath-Thariah were not just passive lights. They were messengers, deities, and guides. They moved with rhythm, and the people moved with them. They prayed, they planted, they fasted, they feared, all according to what the heavens revealed. The moon was the most beloved, gentle, and reliable. Known as Qamar, Hilal, or Wad, it watched over caravans by night, painting a silver path across the dunes. It softened the harshness of the world, offering its glow to shepherds and poets alike. The moon's cycles were sacred, marking seasons, decisions, and sacred times. The crescent remains a central symbol of Islam to this day, but its sanctity reaches far before the Prophet's time. It was the healer of the dark, the keeper of rhythm, the lantern of the divine. Venus, or Al-Zuhara, appeared as both the morning star and evening star. In her brightness lived the goddess Al-Uzza. To some she represented beauty and desire, to others warfare and justice. Her dual nature mirrored the dual nature of life, love and loss, power and humility. When Venus rose before dawn, it was seen as a sign of coming change. Tribes fasted, married, declared war, or held their children close, all depending on her mood. She was a force in the sky and a spirit on the earth. Sirius, the brightest of them all, was called Ash-Shearer. Its appearance in the early morning heralded the rains in Yemen, just as it had signaled the flood of the Nile in Egypt. To the desert dwellers, it was the star of mercy, a sign that life would return to barren lands. The Quran mentions it by name, and rightly so. It brought not only water, but wonder. Its seasonal rising was the hope of survival in a land where rain was salvation. Sirius was loved not as a god, perhaps, but as a faithful friend in the sky. The Pleiades, Ath-Thariah, were viewed with mystery. Their clustered glow was seen as the breath of heaven. When they shimmered on the horizon, prayers were whispered, feet climbed hills, and songs of rain were sung. Even the star Aldebaran, called Aldebaran, was imagined as a lover chasing after Ath-Thariah, always just behind, always yearning. The stars had stories, just like people. They taught lessons without ever speaking. They reminded us that we are small, but not forgotten. This deep connection to the cosmos shows that long before divine revelation descended, the divine had already risen in the eyes of man. And when Islam adopted the lunar calendar, turned to the moon for Ramadan, and acknowledged stars in its scripture, it did not replace these beliefs. It honored them. So what can we learn? That belief doesn't always fall from the sky. Sometimes it rises from the earth, looks upward, and simply listens. And in listening, it becomes sacred. Just as the stars still burn above us, our longing for direction still lives within us. But not all divine names were written in the sky. Some were whispered by tribes and travelers, carried from land to land across time. And one of those names rose above all others, simple and eternal, Allah. The mystery of Allah. From El Elyon to Allah, Allah. A name that today echoes from minarets etched into billions of hearts. But this name did not begin with the Quran. It did not originate on the lips of the Prophet alone. It is older, far older. a thread that runs through ancient Semitic languages and beliefs. From El of the Canaanites, to Ilum of the Akkadians, to Allah of the Arameans and Syriac Christians, Allah is part of a sacred lineage of high gods. He was not made new, he was remembered. In the kingdom of Lihian, theophoric names like Abdallah, servant of Allah, were already common by the 5th century CE. The father of the prophet himself was named Abdullah, yet even then Allah was not alone. He was the supreme God, yes, but one among many. The distant, silent, omnipotent creator whom people acknowledged but rarely prayed to directly, a Deus Otiosus, the resting God. This quiet distance is what made him sacred. His name was invoked in oaths, in moments of awe, in final appeals when all other gods had failed. But he had no statue, no temple, no cult. He was too vast for form, too holy for ritual. The Quraysh may have acknowledged him, but they loved Hubal, relied on Al-Uzza, and feared Manat. Allah was high above, untouched, unnamed in ritual. Revered but remote. What the prophet did was revolutionary not in creation, but in concentration. He gathered the scattered rays of belief and pointed them toward one source. Allah was not to be part of a pantheon anymore. He was the beginning and the end. He was not to be mediated by daughters or idols. He would speak directly through revelation. He would be accessible but never ordinary, known but never shaped. Yet in doing so, the prophet built upon what was already present. The very word Allah is composed of Al, the, and Ilah, God. The God, not just any God, the only one worthy of that title. And in that linguistic act, a bridge was formed across centuries and civilizations. Yahweh was seen as the God of the Jews, the Father as the God of Christians. And now, Allah would be the unifying name for the Arabs. But does that make all three the same? This question has echoed through centuries and still sparks debate. Comment if you believe they are one, or if you feel they stand apart. This part of the story invites humility, that what we call new often rests on the shoulders of the old. That sacred language is never born in isolation, and that even the most powerful name carries with it the breath of thousands of unnamed prayers. From the high God above, we now return to one of his earliest seekers. A man who walked away from idols, looked at the stars, and found God not in shape or sound, but in surrender. His name was Abraham. Abraham the myth, inventing ancestry and faith. Abraham is known as the friend of God, the father of nations, the root from which Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all claim to grow. But the soil of his story is complex, layered with myth, memory, and meaning. He may not be found in archaeology, yet he is etched in the moral imagination of billions. His story is not just historical, it is archetypal. Born in Ur of the Chaldees, son of an idol maker, Abraham looked upon the world and saw emptiness in the gods of stone. He questioned, he doubted, he watched the stars. First he thought the star was his Lord, then the moon, then the sun. But all disappeared, and then he said, "I turn my face to the one who created the heavens and the earth." In that moment, myth or not, humanity took a new spiritual step. He left his home. He walked deserts. He spoke to the unseen. He fathered Isaac, and from Isaac came the tribes of Israel. He fathered Ishmael, and from Ishmael came the tribes of Arabia. Through one man, two destinies, two lines of faith. Two worlds forever tied and forever strained. Islam remembers Abraham not only as the first monotheist, but as the rebuilder of the Kaaba. Alongside his son Ishmael, he lifted the sacred walls, laid the black stone, and prayed that their descendants would remain in submission. The Hajj itself is a living reenactment of Abraham's trust, Hagar's desperation, Ishmael's innocence, But his story also reminds us that faith is born from courage, from walking away from comfort, from choosing the unknown over the familiar. Abraham left behind idols, not because they were false, but because they no longer spoke to his soul. In that silence, he heard God. His journey teaches us that every great belief starts with a question, that heritage is not only about blood, but about bravery, and that sometimes the most powerful truth is not proven, it is chosen. And yet, what happens when an entire people, inspired by that same courage, decide to reshape not just their rituals, but their reality, from submission to survival? Why Islam conquered so fast. Arabia was never an easy land. Its mountains were sharp. Its winds were unkind, its rains were rare. To live here was not to conquer nature, but to yield to it. And so the people learned the wisdom of submission, not weakness, but alignment. Not despair, but devotion. When Islam arose, it did not introduce this idea. It simply named it, Islam, to submit. But this submission was not slavery. It was sanctuary. It offered purpose to suffering, order to uncertainty, unity to division. The rituals of prayer, the direction of Qibla, the structure of community, all gave rhythm to a land once ruled by tribal chaos. Within just a decade, the message swept across the peninsula, not just because of the sword, but because it made sense. The people had fasted before. Now they fasted for a reason. They had prayed before. Now they knew to whom. The stars still shined, but now they pointed to the one behind them. Islam succeeded because it did not destroy the soul of Arabia. It refined it. It gathered the broken mirrors of belief and built a window to the heavens. And maybe that is the true meaning of submission. Not silence, but surrender with awareness, a letting go, not of freedom but of fear. So as we finish this journey, from stones to stars, from gods to God, from myth to meaning, we are left with one final truth. The most sacred stories are not the ones we memorize. They are the ones we live. And in every act of faith, whether ancient or new, we are all still walking toward the same light. And so we arrive at the edge of memory, where myth meets scripture, and sand remembers every footstep that ever dared to question the sky. This is not the end of a story. It never was. It is the continuation of a sacred conversation that began not with books, but with silence. Long before the rise of monotheism, the deserts of pre-Islamic Arabia pulsed with the breath of forgotten gods, divine feminine energy, sacred trees, star-born rituals, and stone-guarded mysteries. And yet from that tapestry of belief and survival, one name, Allah, rose to gather the wind, the moon, the fire, and the longing into one direction, one Qibla, one voice. But does unity always mean erasure? Does submission require forgetting? Or is it possible that within the shape of every sacred act today still lingers the rhythm of the ancient ones? When you walk around the Kaaba during Hajj, you retrace a circle older than books. When you fast during Ramadan, your body echoes the hunger of those who once refrained not for rules, but for rain. When you gaze at Sirius rising over the desert sky or whisper prayers beneath the crescent moon, you are not only worshipping the one, you are remembering the many. Not in disobedience, but in deep ancestral gratitude. Even the stones that once housed deities have not disappeared. They have been transformed. The black stone remains. The Kaaba stands. The motion continues. Perhaps this is the mercy hidden in time, that nothing sacred is truly lost. It is only reshaped. There is something healing in recognizing that faith evolves. That the origins of Islam were not a break from humanity, but a bridge between earth and sky, past and future, longing and revelation. The Prophet didn't silence the wind. He gave it a direction. He didn't erase the stars. He taught us to see the one who created them. Even Hubal, Al-Uzza, Al-Lat, and Manat, goddesses, warriors, mothers of belief. They may have fallen from altars, but they live in the language, in the rhythm of names, in the traces of mercy and power we still hold sacred today. This story was never meant to be a controversy. It was meant to be a mirror, to show us that behind every belief lies a human cry, a desire to understand the chaos, a need to trust that we are not alone in this wide, unpredictable world. And it is in that cry where religions are born, not to divide, but to dignify. If you felt even a spark of clarity, if the journey through Arabian mythology, ancient Kaabas, the daughters of Allah, star worship, and monotheism's rise stirred something deep within your soul, something quiet, something you didn't even have words for, then perhaps the story is working as it always has, as healing. Let this video be more than information. Let it be illumination. If in any moment you felt the weight of history lifting, if any visual gave you chills, or if the words reminded you that your questions are valid, your seeking is sacred, then I invite you to carry that light forward. Share this story not just with others, but with yourself. Reflect. Breathe. Return to it whenever you feel the need to reconnect with what is ancient, what is rooted, what is true. And if this video brought you even a moment of peace in a restless world, if it helped you feel more grounded, more spiritually seen, more alive, then I gently ask, offer back a little energy. Nothing grand, just enough to keep this circle flowing. Enough to let me know that the effort to tell stories like this is meaningful, not just for me, but for you. Every bit of support, every click, every whisper of encouragement is a blessing I hold with reverence. If this helped you find light in a dim place, I welcome any gesture, small, sincere, that keeps that flame burning. It's not about donation. It's about devotion. If you feel compelled, subscribe and stay for the next journey. Like this video if your heart nodded along at any point. And I would love to read your thoughts below, whether you agree, question, or even challenge, especially if something here doesn't sit comfortably. Those are the conversations that help us all grow. What do you think about the polytheistic roots of Islam, the worship of stars and stones, the transformation of feminine deities into divine names? Let's keep speaking, remembering, wrestling. The comment section is a campfire. Join it. And finally, from the bottom of a heart that believes in the power of storytelling, that believes that every forgotten God deserves a moment of remembrance, that every spiritual seeker deserves to feel less alone. Thank you for your time, for your presence, for your courage to see faith not as a fortress, but as a flowing river. Wherever you are, whatever you believe, may peace rest upon your soul like desert rain, gentle and rare. And may your journey forward be guided not only by doctrine, but by wonder. Until next time, may the stars bless you, may your footsteps be steady, and may your heart always know that you too are part of the story.